So, welcome back to Third Age Reforged and to another battle replay on the test build, and this is going to be continuing the Dwarven theme. I think this is also going to be the battle which we bid goodbye to 2023 with, and this is going to be ZAGH. So the minimap is a little bit of a peculiarity on this one. It's going to mean that I have to pay a good amount of due attention to this one in terms of trying to chart the path through the settlement, but in typical Dwarven fashion it is going to be very much about those entrenched positions that the dwarves do like to take up and narrow passageways, although maybe not in the traditional sense, given that some of these are flanked by these lakes of lava. And just going back through to the town centre, there's a good amount of pathways through the settlement as well, which I think is key when it comes to making a good dwarven settlement, because if it just turns into a single track road to the end, it turns into a bit of a grindy affair, which a little bit of that is not too bad, but of course you want to see a little bit of dynamism to your fights as well. This is a rather snazzy little custom asset here, a throne in front of this treasure hoard with the scripture on it as well. It's going to be a varied dwarven defence this time as well. Last time Ered was joined by Dale. This time I think it's Khazad and Ered Luin, I believe. But a good amount of Khazad here with their huge amount of upfront quality. Of course, Ered Luin bringing some good supporting tools to the equation as well, I think. Although I think there may only be one Ered Luin army, unless I'm very much mistaken, and it's only Khazad. Either way, the settlement is not too dissimilar to the old version of Moria, only, like I said, a little bit more varied in terms of varying paths that the attackers can take. Speaking of which, we will start off with the attackers outside, which is probably a good thing that we're not going to be viewing the battle outside. I mean, it is kind of festive, I suppose, to see the snow, but snow and sun make for a rather lurid combination. And we shall see the Orcs of the Misty Mountains on the attack with Infinity, playing as one of the Misty Mountains attackers. Drake Broodlings, which in a battle like this, timing is going to be absolutely everything with them, because if they do get stopped dead in their tracks by superior Dwarven infantry, they will fall away fairly quickly. Albeit, if they get used at the right time, they can barrel through an underprepared Dwarven defence and give the Misty Mountains that momentum they will need to try and take good advantage of their numbers, just like we saw in the previous battle that took place in the Lonely Mountain, of course. Moria Halberdiers were also a useful unit in that situation because of their numbers. The armour piercing doesn't hurt, and if it does turn into a grindy affair, this is one of the units the Misty Mountains can use to anchor their advance in place. Though, of course, the quality discrepancy, especially when you compare them to equivalent Khazad units, is going to be fairly significant. Their old enemy Khazad, of course, both claiming their home to be the same place. And, of course, they pretty much on polar opposite sides of the spectrum when it comes to the quality-quantity debate. Moria Spearguard, which were also very, very useful in the previous battle, not only for the fact that they were useful when the Misty Mountains got rolling with their numbers, but also the fact that they were able to sustain casualties in the early phases of the battle to enemy archers, because there are so many of them, and which is one of those very important aspects to the Misty Mountains army. Another unit of Moria Spearguard here. A couple of units of Black Uruks of the Mountains as well. They do lack the armour piercing, which would make them really effective against the dwarves, but they do combine a good amount of base melee damage with a good amount of base melee defence as well, for a Misty Mountains unit of this type, of course. One of the more entry-level heavy swordsman units that the game has to offer, but those numbers really do them a lot of favours in a battle like this. White Uruk Fearmongers are going to be a very important unit for the Misty Mountains, because they do represent a unit of genuine quality with that armour piercing, and overall they're obviously a much superior unit to the Moria Halberdiers, which means if they can get into an advantageous engagement, if they manage to avoid enemy pike units, they can be one of those units which can really stand toe-to-toe against some of the scarier Dwarven units. Goblin Kingsguard, more numerous than many other bodyguard units of this type. Again, when it comes to matching up one-to-one against the equivalent Dwarven units, this is where they will struggle a bit. But obviously the Misty Mountains dipping into those numbers is not surprising, even when it comes to their higher tier units. And ultimately against the rank and file dwarves they will do just fine. And I'll be interested to see how the heavy goblin crossbows get on. They weren't actually all that important to the Misty Mountains victory, or the Misty Mountains contributing victory in Erebor. This time as well, ZAGH is not the sort of settlement where it will be that easy to deploy crossbows as the Misty Mountains may like. Meanwhile, further northward we have yet another Misty Mountains army under the command of Mevin. Snow Trolls were useful for claiming a little bit of momentum last time, and I'm sure that will be the case this time as well. They don't have quite the same resilience as some of the more heavily armoured trolls that the game has to offer, but they do still offer that really good burst damage. Of course, even against stronger units, they're capable of putting a dent in them, which will be key when it comes to the Misty Mountains trying to claim that all-important momentum for an Orcish faction. Moria Halberdiers here as well in large numbers, which is not that surprising. A big army this from Mavin, going for the numbers-heavy approach, which is, again, not unheard of for the Misty Mountains by any means. Several units of Moria Spearguard to back those Halberdiers up. Of course, numbers are all well and good if they can intersperse a bit of quality with the trolls and a bit of support as well from 3 units of heavy goblin crossbows as well. I think the key is going to be trying to claim a good position for them to fire into a dwarven defensive line. So choosing where they make their stand is going to be absolutely vital for the dwarves today. If they can avoid the sticky end that crossbows can often inflict upon defenders, they've gone some way to really deploying their quality effectively. Another unit of the Goblin Kingsguard to help tie things together at the high end for the Misty Mountains. Not too surprising to see where Mavin has invested in quality. It's going to include the White Uruk Fearmongers for the same reason that we've already mentioned with Infinity's army, and the Drake Broodlings as well. So a little bit more risky perhaps, but the risk, if it does pay off, is well worth it. Now then, we have Winged Swordsman, another Misty Mountains army. I think it's all Misty Mountains armies. No, one Angmar in force as well. So a little bit more varied over on this side. It was a potent combination in Erebor. Let's see if it's the same for ZAGH Kala. Blackback Mountain Berserkers, I mean, they definitely have the damage to keep pace with the dwarves, but they do lack the defensive prowess, which means they will fizzle out a little bit more quickly. But again, you do need some units for the Misty Mountains to deal that damage to the dwarves a little bit more quickly, so I can definitely see the benefit to bringing the Blackbacks. We've also got some Moria Spearguard once more. We've got, those are just banner carriers. Unsurprising to see the heavy goblin crossbows again, perhaps just because of the the reward for bringing them is too potentially high to ignore. We've got more Moria Halberdiers, more in the way of crossbows in there as well, so not deviating too much from the company line here. Winged Swordsman going for a little bit more in terms of the very entry level units for the Goblin Infantry here, unupgraded as they are. Obviously they're not going to make too much of a dent individually in any Dwarven units, but very numerous and also very cheap, of course. Another unit of the Drake Broodlings and some Moria Spearguard as well. The Misty Mountains do have a few units that can hide, so I wouldn't be too surprised if Winged Swordsman has got a couple of them hidden away as well. And finally, the one Angmar in force under the command of Froggy. Of course, we know what they're all about. They are aggressive in much the same way, though they're less dependent on having overwhelming numbers, and instead secure that advantage by still having a decent numerical advantage, but also packing on that armour and making sure their individual units can survive long enough for the numbers to really start to hammer home that advantage. Trolls of Angmar, a little bit more well armoured than the Snow Trolls. The Snow Trolls are a little bit faster, I believe, still. That's not going to be too important in a battle like this, however, so I think the Trolls of Angmar do have the edge there, but very much the same sort of thing. Negligible advantages one way and the other. The Gundabad Guard as well, a unit of good defensive spears. Obviously with the main line of Angmar, we will see them be a little bit more resilient, even down to the Angmar Marauders. In comparison to the standard Goblin Infantry, they're a little bit more resilient than their peers from the Misty Mountains. Another unit of the Gundabad Guard. Guardians of Khan Doom are a unit which the Misty Mountains don't really have an equivalent to, a sort of really defensive mainline infantry unit. Good shields, well suited for shrugging off any sort of arrow fire, which with the Blue Mountains on display, which I believe they are, that's something which could yet come into play. Blackwatch Legion for that mass pushing as well is exactly the sort of thing. If a battle is not going your way and you need to try and force the issue, which is very likely considering how the dwarves can dig in, a unit like the Blackwatch Legion can break a stalemate. And then 2 bodyguard units here at the back, the Blackguard, and definitely not surprising to see the Witchram Hammer Guard, considering the armour piercing that they bring to the table and considering how universally useful that is against the dwarves. That is why the general is as well. And a unit of Trolls of Angmar here also. Now, in behind this gatehouse, we start with Khazad, Lango. I think it's been a little while actually since we've seen Lango, so good to see him again. Some unupgraded 3rd Legion, as well as some unupgraded 4th Legion, but the armour upgrades are not terribly important here. They are still going to have the individual quality edge against anything they perceive other than the bodyguard tier units that the attackers will be laying on, but they're going to have to really showcase themselves as being able to butcher their way through those more numerous units of orcs and goblins, which is exactly what the 3rd Legion in particular are very, very good at. And when it does come to those slightly scarier units, the Khazad Reclaimers, throwing axes for doing a lot of damage to pretty much anything really. The shields of something like the Blackwatch Legion will mitigate the damage somewhat, but also the two-handed axe on their back means even if trolls do interrupt them, they are capable of defending themselves with that high armor-piercing damage. More 4th Legion as well. As we go through the snaking corridors, we arrive at yet more 3rd Legion. So 3rd and 4th Legion are going to be the backbone of Lango's army, which is not that surprising. I mean, the 4th Legion for that defensive stability, and then the 3rd Legion for that extra damage with their axes in hand. As we make our way further back, yet more of the 4th Legion, this time from Eclipse 2500, of course, who shared this battle replay with me, so big thank you to him. Several units of the Sentries of Khazad from Lango. Again, all of the potential phalanx threats that Angmar and the Misty Mountains have on the field today are halberdiers. Like, we didn't see any Witchround pikemen from Angmar, so they should have the domineering advantage there. It's just whether or not they can keep their defensive lines solid. More 3rd Legion there as well. We have some Orc Hunters of Khazad, obviously archers. Good amount of damage from them. They're probably the one example of a unit in the Khazad roster which is maybe a little bit less blessed when it comes to their armor score, but they're still going to be dominant, especially against the Misty Mountains and Angmar at long range, on two of the factions in the game which really don't put a huge amount of stock, especially Angmar, in their archers. Another unit of Orc Hunters, so 3 units of them ready to start firing into the enemy as they start moving forwards. Some Sons of the Fallen, a very strong unit of defensive spears, of course. I mean, for the cost, they may not be the most damaging unit of infantry that the game has to offer, but they are absolutely bulletproof when it comes to holding and managing to stay alive for long periods of time. And the Hammers of Gundabad offset their offensive frailties maybe a little bit with that huge armor-piercing damage they do. And let's not forget as well the locked morale that they also bring to the table. Khazad Reclaimers, got some Sons of the Fallen also. Orc Hunters of Khazad as we make our way snaking towards another one of the gates. Orc Hunters of Khazad, 3rd Legion Infantry, and Sons of the Fallen once again, so going for that spear 3rd Legion Infantry combination with a little bit of archer support. Sprinkled in there is the odd unit of Khazad Reclaimers as well. I mean, the throwing axe damage is very, very nasty, of course, and it's the sort of thing which can help thin out those orcish numbers pretty quickly, so they'll be an important unit, as will the sentries on the front line. More 3rd Legion and more 4th Legion. Hopping over to the other side here, yes, we do have the Blue Mountains, Mr. Sneakman playing as them. Defenders of the Blue Mountains are a basic unit of spears, maybe not quite on the same level as the Legion units that we've already seen, but they will certainly do a job, and they're a little bit cheaper as well, so it will allow the Blue Mountains to spend a little bit more elsewhere. And they still have 3rd Legion to back up as well, Tundra's Fox, so 3 Khazad and 1 Blue Mountains is how the split for the defenders works. 3rd Legion and Sentries of Khazad as well, making our way towards the Gatehouses, more 4th Legion. Khazad Reclaimers, this is a pretty nasty defensive position for Infinity to work his way through. Khazad Reclaimers and Orc Hunters have a very good position to defend, with 4th Legion and 3rd Legion once again standing in the way. So these Legion units for Khazad are going to be the backbone of this defence. We'll really see how good their trash-killing capabilities are. Sentries of Khazad and 3rd Legion once again, huge amount of 3rd Legion in particular, so it's a great chance for them to shine really, because it should be an area where they're strong. Orc Hunters, as we make our way back, we also have yet more of the Reclaimers, and then the Guards of Khazad as well. That armor-piercing damage that they deal in melee will be the sort of thing which the attackers will be very, very worried about, especially if they haven't really managed to get through to the town centre in an efficient manner. The Khazad or the Guards of Khazad and the Reclaimers are exactly the kind of combination which can really finish them off. 4th Legion, making our way back, we've also got Mercenary Crossbowmen. They can transition throughout the settlement pretty quickly, which is going to be key. I mean, ZAGH may not have the open spaces that Erebor had in the last battle, but it is still pretty big and pretty vast, so flitting between various defensive choke points. If you have cavalry, that's a little bit easier, of course. Sentries of Khazad once again. Do have some upgraded 3rd Legion here as well from Eclipse 2500, so they've got a little bit extra in terms of their own defensive abilities. more Orc Hunters as well. And then here in the town centre we have the vast majority of the Blue Mountains army by the looks of it. Several units of the armour-piercing Stone Hewers. We've got more of the Spear Guard of Thorin's Halls here, or the first example of this unit of the higher tier spear unit that the Dwarves of the Blue Mountains have. This is much more the equivalent of the 4th Legion from Khazad. We also have the Guardians of the Blue Mountains, a good Javelin hybrid unit there, so they're going to be able to hold their own in melee as well as dealing good damage at range. We've got the Warriors of the Blue Mountains, a nice entry-level melee units. Still got some Khazad units in here as well with the Sons of the Fallen. The Juggernauts are here also. Bodyguard tier unit for the Blue Mountains, a dual-wielding unit. Again, they should do really well, especially against the rank and file Dwarven units that we see on the battlefield today. Good matchups for them. And the Wardens of Thorin's Hall as well. Kind of the equivalent, I suppose, to the 3rd Legion, only they trade in the shield for a second weapon in hand, which compromises their defence against missiles a little bit, but it does give them a bit of extra melee defense, especially with those axes in hand. Again, it should make them excellent trash killers. And a couple more units over here of warriors and defenders as well, so a good numerous army actually for the Blue Mountains to back up the Legion heavy forces from Khazad, and Mr. Sneakman can deploy his forces as and where they're needed, considering much of his army is in the town centre to start with. So we'll make a little bit of a cut, and I suppose we'll rejoin as the gates are being battered down, because after that I imagine the attackers will start to make their way inside the settlement pretty quickly. So yeah, we'll see how long these gates can hold for. So the Dwarves are going to lay on a defence just inside the gate, which is probably for the best. As we've already mentioned, many of these regular Dwarven units from Khazad should have a pretty good time of it against much of what the attackers can lay on, although in all fairness the Snow Trolls are the sort of unit that can actually make a dent pretty quickly in a unit like the 3rd Legion, even though over the long haul, if they're willing to send forwards a bit more, I mean, again, like, there's only a small sliver of the Dwarven army really, so it's not too surprising to see the attackers immediately go for a sort of all-out, full-blooded assault like this. I don't really know what Lango was expecting, only having 3 units here to try and hold back the full force of the attacking armies. We saw this on Erebor, and I dearly hope we're not going to see the same mistakes made this time around, just because I couldn't say anything nice about the attacking armies I haven't already said in that one. I would quite like to give praise in maybe some different ways. I mean, he's moving forward now, but it's a little bit like closing the stable door after the horse is bolted. If you didn't intend to go all in on the gate defence, then you probably shouldn't have had any units here in the first place. Khazad Reclaimers, I mean, to be fair, this is where they will earn their salt in melee. Like I said, those 2-handed axes of theirs should be able to bring down these trolls without, well, with sustained effort at the very least. 4th Legion Shield Guard on the way forward. I mean, the 3rd Legion are holding the line fairly resolutely, considering the sheer force that they're being met with here. And more units are coming in, so maybe just based on the fact that Khazad are such a heavy-duty faction and have the necessary quality, maybe they will be able to salvage this. We do have another unit, well, that is the unit of Khazad Reclaimers that are trying to slip the net, really, get into a position where they can start throwing their payloads into the onrushing attackers. It is maybe more important for the attackers to start gaining some real ground over here anyway, considering the fact that there are 2 armies effectively being bottlenecked through this one gate, whereas on the other side the attackers do have a little bit more variety working in their favour. The Drake Broodlings haven't managed to completely claim the edge yet, and you can see now Lango is starting to peel some of his units off. So I mean, it's not been a brilliant start from the Dwarves, just based on a bit of misjudgment here right from the off, but they haven't lost so much that it's going to be absolutely crippling for them, although the speed, honestly, of the Snow Trolls might prove to be a little bit of a problem here, and the Drake Broodlings. It means they'll be able to take some nibbles out of the retreating spears here from the 4th Legion Shield Guard, and I think lesson very much learned. Going to have to consolidate their strength and defend as a unit a little bit more on this side. Khazad. Meanwhile, over here, not really anything else going on throughout the battlefield so far. I mean, not too surprising over here, because this position for Infinity's Misty Mountains force, as we mentioned, is not particularly appealing. And as we make our way over here as well, slowly but surely, Mevin's got quite a long way to trudge before he gets into a position where this gate can start to be crumbled. We hop over right into the midst of a lake of lava. I mean, these Khazad reclaimers are still being hunted by the Drake Broodlings, and you have to say, just based on this rather hurried retreat from Khazad and the opportunities that brings, the Drake Broodlings have already proven to be a good unit to bring. The risk was there, but it is what it is, and I mean, not many of these Khazad reclaimers are going to survive. They should have a good amount of their ammunition left to them, but they're going to need to be used perfectly from here on out. Is that going to be possible? The Legion Shield Guard did get caught. Again, doubling down is not going to help matters. Eclipse needs to make sure his units are safe, and they're going to need to be, well, like I said, pretty much perfect from here on out on this side of the battlefield if they're going to hope to make up for this early calamity. You can't really blame the attackers for going about their business in this way. Like a red rag to a bull when you only have 3 units to try and hold back an entire army like that, especially one that's going to be led with high mass units like drakes and trolls. Further afield, trolls of Angmar ready to move forward. I mean, it is more of a consolidated position, this. It's got the high ground in behind. It's maybe not quite as sticky as it is for the attackers over on the other side, but they do still have the ability to bring their archers forwards. Speaking of which, I mean, immediately the heavy goblin crossbows are coming in, so Infinity going to try and counter skirmish. I mean, it's an idea, I suppose, but it's not really going to end too well for them. I mean, crossbows in the first case are going to be one of the first choices of target for the defenders here, and it's just making their lives easier if you line them up right in front of the orc hunters there. Maybe they would be trying to whittle down this front line as well, again comprised of these Legion units, but I don't think there's any way around it for Infinity. I think he's going to have to move forward and just accept the fact that he's going to take a hefty chunk of damage, although once again, looking at this, they are cheaping out a little bit on their front line. I mean, the reinforcements are a little bit more readily available, at least here, but we'll see if that proves to be a little bit of a problem. Making our way back through the settlement, the heart of ZAGH over here. It's a small matter of another front line potentially being opened up. Again, sentries of Khazad backing up these 3rd Legion, but could be a good opportunity to use the trolls early for Mevin. Try and smash this dwarven front line up a little bit, gain that momentum, and then send forward the entirety of the army, because once again, looking at maybe a little bit more lightweight, and unlike everywhere else, I have to say the initial reinforcements are going to have a little bit of a trek to get over here. Could that prove to be exactly the same error that was made here? So the attackers are going to start to stack themselves up. Gundabad Guard and Angmar Marauders. Angmar taking the lead over there. Misty Mountains over on the other side. So the trolls still, most of them left standing. Not many of them fell by the wayside in that initial very aggressive push, which is not terribly surprising given the advantages they had. And I mean, they are continuing to really front load their attack here, and why not? They've had success with it so far, and the dwarves didn't deal with it that well initially, so they're going to send forward the Blackback Berserkers. The trolls are going to follow them in as well, presumably to try and disrupt that formation of sentries of Khazad backing up these 3rd Legions. And so far, I mean, the dwarves, I think they probably need to send forward a little bit more quality. I mean, much of their army is made up of these Legion units, which gives them a good average level of quality, but the bodyguard units the dwarves are well known for maybe would be a good way to stem the bleeding over here. Orc fellas moving forward in the vanguard, a little bit less quality over on this side initially from Froggy, and the archers already going to try and pick off these slightly weaker units. And moving forwards are the Gundabad Guard. The trolls are a little bit further afield, so they won't be immediately dispatched to this location. Heavy Goblin crossbows, are they in a position where they can actually hit their foes? Kind of. They can hit the support units just in behind, which is better than nothing, certainly. They're not going to be able to rip their way through the front lines for the time being. Well, over here, yeah, again, not too surprising to see a good amount of force being applied. I mean, if there's one thing you can say about the 3rd Legion is, even in the face of really aggressive, heavy pushes like this, they have held up better than most other units would have, but it's still not been to their benefit for this to be the kind of battles that they've been fighting so far. There's a few throwing axes coming in, but they don't really have the best of angles. I mean, the throwing axes will be excellent at dealing with something like the Mountain Orc Berserkers. Back go the trolls now, Maven maybe not feeling the full-blooded assault that they undertook on the other side with the arrival of another unit of 4th Legion. And then Infinity over here. We try and make our way through the cliff. There we go, finally. Some of the Drakes have managed to get in behind enemy lines, again bowling through the Dwarven front lines. It will help to interrupt the flow of these Khazad Reclaimers, although you can see just one volley there did some pretty heavy damage to the Drakes. And when it comes to just sustained melee, those two-handed axes should have the desired effect. Once again, we're seeing a very heavy assault. The Drake Broodlings moving down, knocking units over as they go, which will make the Trolls' passage just a little bit easier. The support from those Orc Hunters. Of course, one thing with Erebor being absent from this battle is the Dwarves will not have access to any of the crossbows, which they perhaps normally would. Khazad Reclaimers trying to reposition themselves. Yeah, the Drake's now routing, which is not too surprising with the arrival of the sentries. They do count as a cavalry unit after all, they have invisible riders. So pikes are going to send them fleeing pretty quickly. As this front line continues to undergo a bit of turmoil, the Orc Hunters can now shift their targets to whatever they choose, really, from the vast amount of goblins that are now pouring in through this gate. Drake's routing on the spot. Snow Troll's going to have to take up the mantle of the high mass unit over here. Khazad Reclaim is probably a little bit close. That unit of pikes will help this front line hold on for maybe a little bit longer, but the Trolls will counteract much of the good that they're likely going to be doing. And they're going to start wading through this front line with increased fervour now. The Khazad Reclaimers start to march their way into place as well. There's a lot of goblins. The die has certainly been cast for this battle, and Maven now joining with his allies and being maybe a little bit more aggressive. The Khazad Reclaimers having to get involved in melee. Again, yardage being gained for all of the attackers so far. Of course, none quite so significant as what happened over here. And this is where the dwarves should really be earning their salt. Massive amounts of orcs and goblins crashing into a prepared defensive line. You can see the trolls have started to fall away over here, maybe less so for the snow trolls, but that should turn around as soon as the hammers of Gundabad really start to connect with some of their melee hits. And one of them dies just at that very moment. Khazad Reclaimers, Guardians of the Blue Mountains, the first example of a Ered Luin unit which has gotten involved on the front line, which, I mean, if they are intended to be used as that support army for all of the front lines, I'm surprised we haven't seen them crop up a little bit sooner, given the dire straits Khazad were in over on this side early on in this battle. Looping shots from the crossbow bolts. There's a large amount of orcs moving forward, a few goblins in there as well, Moria Spearguard. The Barrow Wights are starting to push their way through the front line, so yeah, not surprisingly, very quickly the Sons of the Fallen are going to have to try and stop that. I know people's opinions on mass pushing, but I mean, the defenders are not doing a fantastic job at counteracting the attackers from doing it. The only thing I would say is the attackers' manpower, while it is significant when you've got 4 orc/goblin factions on the attack, it's not limitless. And engaging in this style of warfare is costly. But they've got a good amount of numbers and quality in a mix here on the front line, and you can see here the Witchround Blackguard at the centre of Froggy's Angmar effort, and obviously with the Barrow Wights on the front line, it's going to be very difficult for them to regain the uniformity of this front line position now. gives Angmar potentially an in to try and help this Misty Mountains push over here, and the Blackwatch Legion are now moving forward. Do they have the reinforcements? No, is the answer. Guardians of the Blue Mountains are going to have to do the business with those javelins. And they are throwing in there. They're going to be getting kills by doing this. Blackwatch Legion going to be taking damage on the way through, certainly from the Hammers of Gundabad, but the Hammers of Gundabad simply not in a good enough state to be able to sustain things now. Heavy Goblin crossbows, I mean, they don't have the ideal angle, but any sort of damage they can do in support of this push now is going to be greatly appreciated, I'm sure. I think at this point the best that the defenders can hope for is that they score some really good victories over on this side, but I mean, we arrive at exactly the moment that that's happening. General falls. How did the Dwarves turn momentum around here? Because there hasn't really been a significant victory for them in the battle so far. Yeah, and victory over here for them as well. Khazad Reclaimers able to flee the scene. They still have a few units over here, but it's definitely in more of a rearguard fashion. So they're going to have to reorganise themselves and consolidate around the town centre and the adjoining antechambers, I think. Because so far this approach has not really been working, to my eye. Some custom reclaimers all along there. They've got front lines set up as well, ready. Again, it's a little bit scattergun. I don't know, we'll have to see. They still have plenty of quality in the backfield at the very least, the Dwarves. That is something they can depend upon. But yeah, brutal in terms of the ability to use mass so far for the attackers. Again, not dissimilar to the very last battle we saw in Erebor. Erebor had it inflicted upon them, and now their Dwarven brethren also much the same. Trolls, combination of all of this mass. I mean, having a look at the casualties inflicted as they've moved down. I mean, it is a lot. I mean, that is the double-edged sword that we are talking about here. It could be that when it comes to trying to take the town centre, all of the losses that have been sustained by the attackers being this aggressive may well catch up to them, especially seeing as that's where the majority of the Dwarven heavy hitters are being stationed for the time being. But that is being optimistic on behalf of the Dwarves, I think. There's no way to spin it, really, that this has been positive for them so far. But I do have faith. I mean, if any faction can turn this around in terms of how strong they can be on the front lines, it is going to be the Dwarves fighting on home turf. Drake Broodlings taking a lot of casualties there from the Khazad Reclaimers, and they do immediately rout. I mean, the faster they can get these Drake Broodlings dealt with across the field, because it's undoubted really at this point that they have been a very good bring for all of the Misty Mountains armies. As we make our way back towards, I mean, there is some good terrain that can be used here. It's almost like there's always two routes that the attackers can take until you get to the town centre. There's still two at that point, but that's where the two halves of the map coalesce into one. But it's never going to be a single choke point fight for the Dwarves. Making our way back, I mean, having a look over here, just trying to get a handle on how much damage has been done to the attackers. I'd say probably a relatively even amount over here. In terms of the infantry losses, the Dwarves, of course, will be feeling quite happy with that. The Drake Broodlings are gone. I would say you would probably want to have seen more of these Snow Trolls finished off as well. As much as they may not be individually as potent as stuff like the Olag High, they've certainly proven to be a very effective tool in this battle as well, which maybe isn't too surprising. The Dwarves thrive on a good organised front line, and the Trolls are one of the very best kinds of units in the game at disrupting that. especially in the numbers that they're in there. Defenders of the Blue Mountains. I mean, Ered Luin in the late game are going to be a very important force because they're really the only ones that remain largely unbloodied. These Orc Hunters slowly trudging back into a defensive position. Pick up the pace there. Orc fellas on the way as well. They've obviously taken a heavy amount of losses on the approach from the Dwarven archers when this defensive position was still occupied. I mean, the Barrow-White's slow movement speed may harm them here, but there's still plenty of this battle to go, let's not forget. I mean, the attackers have made swift progress through these areas, but eventually they're going to run up against that Dwarven steel wall, you would imagine. And they could also completely circumvent the town centre and try and support one another by going this way, which is an interesting thing for the attackers to do. It is a well thought out settlement, this. Again, like I said, it definitely has that old school Moria vibe about it, with all of the architecture and generally the vibe of it, but it's much better put together. It isn't ultimately a long snaking choke point. The back still trudging their way through. And the attackers aren't really in any great rush at this point. The dwarves have chosen the ground that they're going to be defending by the looks of it. And they can stack up however they choose. Perhaps over on this side of things, considering Infinity and Mevin are still completely separate to one another, the goal should be to try and link up as quickly as they can, pool their resources and really take full advantage of the numbers as we have seen so far. Spearguard, Thorin's Halls as well. All of the armour piercing they still have available to them. They're going to need every ounce of that still. It was good use of the Blackback Berserkers as well. They have taken losses, as of course they will. They're not the most durable unit in the world in spite of their dual wielding in melee. But keeping that momentum I think was more important than safeguarding high tier units, and there are other bodyguard units that your allies have, so I think it was a good move from Wind Swordsman to commit them when he did. And they're ultimately not completely gone either. Further back. I do like the fact that Angmar and the Misty Mountains are also not content to completely isolate themselves from one another. They are mixing and matching their armies consistently, which is good to see. Spearguard of Thorin's Halls being attacked by an advanced party of Orc fellas, but that was maybe asking a little bit much of a unit that was already this depleted to go into a fully healthy unit of eager dwarves. We're going to need a few more victories like that on a larger scale, I think, the defenders. Angmar Marauders rushing forth. As are the Barrow-Whites. I mean, 158 of them still. The unit is pretty stretched out. They have taken losses though. Even they will take notable losses in a situation like that. Forward come maybe another underprepared unit. I think these guys are going to rout as well. The defenders will definitely take all the help they can get. It's unfortunate to have the camera be like that for this particular fight, but it is what it is. And Marauders sent packing. Goblin Kingsguard on the way forwards as well, so the attack has begun in earnest now. Orc Hunters of Khazad overwatching this particular part of the front line. Defenders of the Blue Mountains, the basic spears, content to hold on for the time being. I mean, this is a good choice of target as well. I mean, the Goblin Infantry are not really too much of a threat anyway, but any kills you get on them, fair enough. It's the Mountain Orc Berserkers, which they will be mainly targeting with these archers. Dangerous armour-piercing unit, but also very, very poor when it comes to keeping themselves alive under arrow fire like that. Defenders of the Blue Mountains are taking losses at the hands of that armour-piercing as well. I mean, they're a functional unit, but again, they're on their own. They're not really being backed up by the units that are right here. They are going for this layered defence, the Dwarves, trying to put several speed bumps in the way of the attackers, really. Time will tell whether that proves to be the right idea late on, but I think the attackers would rather it be this way. It is probably better from a spectacle perspective as well that we aren't just seeing one big dwarven block of infantry and the attackers breaking upon it. Warriors of the Blue Mountains getting involved now. They will certainly manage to defeat the goblin infantry with relative impunity. Mountain Orc Berserkers still taking losses as well, but fresh 253 strong unit of Moria Spearguard, which is also being answered in turn by a fresh unit of 3rd Legion Infantry. Make our way back. I mean, Infinity has probably the biggest conundrum of all, purely because he has another one of these wide open square rooms to have to try and deal with. Some dead 3rd Legion, presumably at the hands of heavy gobbo crossbows. Orc hunters probably will be forced into returning fire into these gobbos as well. There is a small matter of the merc crossbows, who can move back and forth as they choose. Are they going to go after the trolls? I mean, the trolls are all bloodied at this point. Come the late game, I don't think many of the heavy mass units are going to be still available for the attackers, as the goblins continue to march their way forwards. Mercenary crossbows head back. 3rd Legion infantry ready as well to defend against another front line being opened. Guardians of Khan'dum not yet ready to begin the march on another Ered Luin led defence. While over here, first of Ered Luin's heavier units having to deal with the Barrow-wights, and I mean they're sending forward a unit of the Juggernauts and the Stonehewers, so they are interested in doing damage maybe a little bit more quickly to these Barrow-wights. Another unit which have been a real thorn in the defenders' side so far. Trying to get into position to support with the crossbows as well. It's not an ideal angle, but it doesn't really need to be for the attackers, as long as they can land a few hits. Try and stretch their numbers advantage as much as they possibly can, and then swamp forth and crush the enemy underfoot. Having to prepare the ground a little bit more so here though than they were in their very first front lines. Orc hunters of Khazad firing a few arrows in. Continuing, I mean, this is a good overwatch position they have. The other unit of Juggernauts on the front line over here, so the rank and file of Ered Luin now being joined by some of the best that they have. In terms of pure infantry, the best that Ered Luin can field. Warrior Halberdiers were committed, probably in an effort to anchor the front line in place, but I mean they're going to be especially susceptible to the arrows from those Orc hunters, so it was never going to end all that well in the long run. And defeat seems certain, only a military genius could win, and they rout. Forward come the other unit of Drakes though, the only unit that now remains. Are they going to be able to force their way through? I mean, the longer they stay in close proximity to the Juggernauts, and also to some of the Blue Mountain Spears, which are still here, that's going to be a bit of a problem. Guardians of the Blue Mountains getting closer. Obviously a good hybrid unit, that. The only sword and board unit, really, that the Dwarves of the Blue Mountains have at this tier of unit as well. They of course have the Warriors as a sort of standard baseline unit, but when you get above that, they've got Spearmen and they've got Dual Wielders as the infantry-only options. So they are an interestingly constructed faction, apparently, in terms of their infantry. 4th Legion victory seems certain. Obviously well-renowned Khazad for their heavy spears being basically as good as regular infantry. We haven't really had a chance to see that in this battle so far because of the sheer numbers they've been asked to deal with earlier on in the battle, but You have to say, the momentum of the attackers has been stifled. The dwarves have managed to stop them dead in their tracks. Whether that's going to be enough long term to be able to start turning them back, we'll have to wait and see. Infinity's still not sure by the looks of things what pathway to take. It's a little bit easier when you're in a situation like this, like they were on the other side when you've got two armies, whereas here you have the choices really of really focusing on one front line or trying to split your attentions. I think for the attackers, they probably would be better at maybe focusing on that route, try and link up with their allies as quickly as possible, but that is the puzzle he is working with. Over here, meanwhile, we find ourselves stuck in the rocks. Froggy moving forward again with his orc fellas at the front. Are they going to get the charge off into the Blue Mountains units again? The basics of the Blue Mountains being the ones to man the front lines first, and then in behind some slightly more impressive units. In fact, the spears are actually going to be the ones to force the issue. Probably a good move, because it does take away the orc fella's ability to charge and get that charge bonus off. You can see how quickly such a defensively fragile unit starts to fall. Warriors of the Blue Mountains. Guardians of Khan Doom in here as well. I mean, there's no armour piercing from the dwarves immediately apparent on this front line, so Guardians of Khan Doom should be able to keep this front line going for quite a while. There's some Barrow Wights in here as well, 200 of them. Not the sort of thing these Ered Luin soldiers are going to have the easiest time dealing with. We're still just before the halfway point in this battle, just for reference. So there's still plenty left to go, and I mean, both sides at this point have been willing to commit heavy hitters. These juggernauts, in terms of concentration of quality, it is a big play for Ered Luin to commit them, and I mean, they still haven't taken any losses, I think, which is a sign of how potent they can be when they're up against kind of units they're good against, and there's no range support to try and take advantage of their lack of a shield. I have seen them in action before, and very impressive as an individual unit goes. They're going to try to maybe mitigate their effectiveness now by parking some halberdiers here. I mean, this is what the Moria halberdiers would have been brought to do. Make an engagement a little bit more efficient for the attackers. Whether they're going to be able to do that or not, I'm not sure. Still got a good amount of those spear guard on the front line as well. They have taken losses, of course, being the first unit there, but still standing firm in the face of all of this admittedly low tier Misty Mountains armour piercing. Yeah, those Barrow Wights taking losses now. Those dual wielding axes proving to be a worthy foe. The Drake Broodlings did retreat, probably not the best situation for them to be in. Heavy Goblin crossbows not in an ideal position to lend their aid either, because of the terrain discrepancies, and the trolls now finally falling away as well. Still 17 of them, but Dwarves able to isolate some of these unit models and start killing them off. More of the Juggernauts have been killed off over here, probably because the trolls have been present, and they're able to do more damage per swing, and also the trolls have plenty of backup. Still doing their job. The more of those trolls fall, the better it will be in the extreme late game for the dwarves in terms of defending their core. Here come the Khazad Reclaimers. Are they out of ammunition? I mean, anything would be welcome on this front line, because I mean, there are a lot of goblins here. A few more axes on the front line would certainly not go amiss. Halberds as well. 35 heavy goblin crossbows. So they have been focused down at least partially by these orc hunter defensive positions. They have decided to defend around the corner as well, albeit this probably the one part of the battlefield where the attackers are still showing some good domination. This one unit of 3rd Legion being overwhelmed by Snaga and Moria halberds. Again, the ultimate example of burying your enemies under a wave of trash. More Snaga skirmishes on the way forwards as well. Setting up another front line. Another speed bump. Snaga skirmishers routing, Black Uruks, Snow Trolls. Big clump of attacking forces continuing to get hit by the arrows. I mean, more importantly perhaps, are the hits that the Khazad Reclaimers are going to be able to land. And they are going after the Trolls, I think, which is interesting. I mean, they're big units. Any additional hits they get on these Black Uruks certainly wouldn't go amiss either. A few more hits going into the other unit Black Uruks from the archers across the way. It's all well and good. Unit of Moria Spearguard, the first one's in, but they're very likely to rout with almost instant effect, I would suggest, against another well-prepared Dwarven front line. Shaken as they are. They're going to get support pretty much immediately though. And the axe throwers won't be able to make that particular angle either. The archers most certainly will, however. So an interesting fight in the making here. The Snow Trolls could yet still prove to be the bane of the dwarves' existence. And they don't have units which are particularly good at dealing damage, but those throwing axes that hit them should have whittled down those hit points pretty significantly. Continuing to go after, again, good choices of targets. House Naught Berserkers, trying to take away as much of their numbers as they possibly can come the late game. Could be the victory. But now the Misty Mountains with those Drake Broodlings, something we missed, a significant moment this. Front line not quite up to the task of another big push, and the battle takes another turn. Khazad Reclaimers in behind enemy lines, still a few of the Juggernauts, but they're now being met with a fresh unit of Blackback Mountain Berserkers, so that will be the end of the Dwarven bodyguards. Very well played that from Mevin. Mevin's army's still in pretty good quality as well, and has got all of the important heavy-hitting infantry units that you would want: White Uruks, Kingsguard, and Blackbacks to try and wrest control of the town centre away as well. Interesting thing now as well, of course, is that Mevin can go to Infinity's aid. Some of these units retreating. It will be a testament to the quality of the dwarves if they're able to pull this out of the bag, to be fair, because there have been several instances in this battle now where circumstances have revealed themselves that lesser factions probably would have crumbled in the face of. Barrow White's still alive on the front line over here, but only 45 of them. Orc Hunters being tasked with holding them at bay. In melee, some Stone Hewers, the Juggernauts taking hits. They need to get out of there quickly to try and mitigate the damage from those crossbows. I can understand why they're being retreated, but we'll see how that goes long term. Sons of the Fallen joining the Blue Mountains units that were on this front line, and I mean, Tron Blackguard and Hammerguard are here. Barrow Whites at the back, Guardians of the Blue Mountains. I mean, continuous javelin fire is one way to really deal with. I mean, I would say the Witchram Hammerguard are the single most dangerous unit for the dwarves on the field in terms of late game ability. Any defensive advantage the dwarves may wish to carry into that part of the battlefield will be curtailed by the huge armour-piercing damage that the Witchram Hammerguard do offer. Orc Hunters on their way back across. I mean, what the dwarves choose to do now is going to be pretty key. They can't actually retreat this way any longer because of the territory that Mevin has gained, so if Tundra's Fox wants to retreat, he's going to have to do it the long way round, which also means it puts extra emphasis on that Angmar front line with the Hammerguard, because if they're not able to hold them at bay there, sections of the Dwarven army will end up cut off. The Trolls, meanwhile, are going to be dealt with, but they will do their job. One still remains standing, as the Orcs once again renew this tactic which served them so well in the early game, and this is going to force the dwarves back into really consolidating around the town centre as much as they possibly can. Still a lot of good units as well, like the White Uruks. Mercenary crossbows still running around. Orc Hunters of Khazad still holding on to the front line. I mean, any kills they can get will be appreciated, but this is still going to be a far more efficient engagement for the attackers at this point in time, so you'd have to say the battle has well and truly turned in terms of momentum once again. Pretty much every front line that the attackers are committing a good amount to is now going their way. This is probably one of the best examples of the crossbows getting a good firing position as well. The dwarves having to bulk up very close to the Moria halberdiers to try and avoid as much of those direct crossbow hits as possible. MVP so far in terms of a single unit has got to be the Snow Trolls as well. They've been terrorising these dwarven front lines, admittedly because many of the dwarven front lines they've been committed to have not been completely comprehensive. What do they even have left at this point, the dwarves? Good front line this. Juggernauts chanting as they are. Warrior Spearguard are routing into this position. Khazad Reclaimer still got some Sons of the Fallen here as well. Hunters now moving backwards. Spearguard of Thorin's Halls and Stone Hewers taking up the mantle on the front line. And just having a look at what's actually being committed to melee here. It's not the best and the brightest of the Misty Mountains. So they should still be able to score a decent amount of kills here. But here, the Misty Mountains sandwiching what remains of the Ered Luin resistance over here, which will allow Mevin and Infinity to directly link up ahead of what will be, of course, the final push. Ooh, this is an interesting choice from Tundra's Fox to move the 4th Legion's shield guard there. I don't know if that was maybe... Sometimes when you try and move a whole clump of units, one of them for some reason medieval 2 will go the wrong way. I was going to say, you may as well send these units back. No need for a rear guard here. Bulking up on this front line. I mean, this is, for all intents and purposes, another final stand location. I think more out of necessity than anything else. They're having to split their efforts, and that mostly comes down to Mevin's conquest of this position. And they could still, in theory, retreat this way. Is an outright victory over here possible? Because if they can beat Winged Swordsman and Froggy over on this side, only have to deal with the Misty Mountains on the other side, that is a way that the dwarves could go on to win this fight. Warriors the Blue Mountains on the front line, Sons of the Fallen, Guardians, all going to be doing their bit to try and make that happen. I mean, those Javelins definitely did their thing. The Blackguard and the Hammer Guard now, very depleted. I mean, the saving grace for Angmar over here is the fact that all of these units, or at least a good portion of them, will be tied up for a while trying to deal with these Barrow Wights. If they can get some support from the other side, however, some Snow Trolls from Winged Swordsmen. 2 units of Snow Trolls this is actually, because one of them's only got a total of 2. The Juggernauts having to return to the front line to try and deal with things. Wards of Thorin's Hall here as well. Those dual-wielding axes trying to do their thing. It really is a matter now of whether or not the attackers can sustain this. Who breaks first? Heavy Goblin crossbows trying to offer their support. The Juggernauts need to commit themselves quickly to try and get up as close as possible. Merc crossbows have been flitting around the battlefield, offering their support and services where needed. Warrior Halberdiers in high numbers again. Hunters just to get more numbers on the front line here. Another dual-wielding unit, interestingly enough, from Khazad this to join all of the offerings from Ered Luin. The Snow Trolls finally succumbing to all of the damage that's been coming their way. A lot of heavy lifting being done from them. Again, I was going to say, that's a good position for the mercenary crossbows to be in. fully visible targets. And that should be enough with crossbow support. I mean, there are blackbacks on the front line, but with crossbow support that should be enough for them to hold on to that position. Sons of the Fallen on their way across to offer a little bit of help as well. Interesting choice. I mean, the barrow ones are not that damaging is the thing, so maybe these Blue Mountain units are trying to ration where they go. I mean, Guards of Khazad, there's a good opportunity here for the dwarves, actually. Victory over on this side could be a huge boon for them, and it may necessitate Mevon maybe picking up the pace a little bit and trying to make a big play for the town centre. The longer they stand there, that's not going to be good for the White Uruk Fearmonger's continued health. Khazad Reclaimers getting some kills early on in proceedings. Are they going to try and... Yes, they're going to... Well, they're going to completely bowl over, actually, this defensive position. I mean, all of those units going to support the other side, it's all well and good, but this is a good little victory for the attackers here to try and maintain that all-important momentum. Still a snow troll left alive. Is he the only example of such? No, there's still a few units over there. Lining up here, the Misty Mountains, to launch an assault on the town centre. Khazad Reclaimers not willing to use their valuable ammunition, perhaps, on these Moria Halberdiers. Now they're going to start moving in. As I mentioned, I think it is in the attacker's best interest to at least try and put some pressure on the town centre at this point, given they can't fully depend on a huge force coming from the other side. So they at least need to make sure that most of these units that are guarding this side are fully committed. Snow Trolls starting to trudge their way in. I mean, the Moria Halberds, if they can get themselves set up, would be a pretty good unit to have here, but having to attack from multiple directions, once again, for the Snow Trolls, it's not a hugely aggressive unit. Blackback Berserkers have been seen. That is exactly the sort of target the Khazad Reclaimers are going to need to do a big number on here, because you can see what the attacker's plot is to try and munch through each side of this square. White Uruk Fearmonger's now moving in as well, putting pressure on that side, but surely that will just... I don't know if they still have ammunition, they do, but that will just convince the Reclaimers to continue throwing their payloads in there. Although I say that and then they immediately go a different way, but you can see how quickly the Moria Halberds were curtailed by the sentries of Khazad. Is this a full-scale retreat now? Reclaimers... I don't know if that's entirely necessary. Winged Swordsman's army is not going to win over here. Maybe it's future-proofing against the fact that the attackers are moving down from this way. Yeah, that must be it. So they're going to try and move backwards with everything they possibly can, and it's going to become a straight battle for the town centre. Probably around 10,000 frames long, so that old metric still shows itself to be a little relevant. Still some Juggernauts left alive, 18 of them. And a lot of heavy lifting, a rear guard being left behind of the Orc Hunters. They will be overwhelmed at this point though. And over here, more treasure for the Orcs, will it be? Or will the Dwarves manage to defend ZAGH in a way they were not able to with Erebor? Few pot shots being taken by the heavy goblin crossbows, arcing their shots. 3rd Legion. Still, Guards of Khazad, still a very strong unit to have in the late game, this healthy as well. That armour piercing damage, will that be enough? Where the general is, and he's looking a little bit bloodied, a little worse for wear. And King's Guard and Blackback Berserkers managing to get in and around the formation a little bit, which could yet prove to be a big problem for the defending dwarves. What have we got going on here? Going to take up a position on the throne, are we? I mean, another, this time very linear front line being set up by the dwarves, being joined by a few Blue Mountains units as they arrive. Heavy Goblin crossbows, or, well, mercenary crossbows I should say, still taking a few pot shots. Only 5 Blackback Mountain Berserkers remain. And they're the target. A few of the Goblin infantry also catching a few of those bolts as well. Still some of the Barrow-wights left, only 3 of them, but considering the amount of time they've spent in the action. A lot of Blacker Rooks, good quality unit that. Whiter Rooks. A lot of Infinity's army is heading across to this side, which is kind of interesting. It's going to be leaving Maven largely up to his own devices. It says victory seems certain for them now. Yeah, and they're sort of repositioning their pikes so they're not getting attacked from the side. So full linear front lines at this point. This is a real problem for them though, the fact that there are still heavy goblin crossbows. Maven's done a fantastic job at using certain units in certain ways. If those crossbows are able to continue to score those hits, it's not going to be great for them. Khazad. Still got plenty of these units, but they can't really afford to take any unnecessary losses at this late stage. In terms of the proportion of units, however, I mean, it is worth saying that a good amount of the attackers still bound up in regular Moria goblins. The kind which can be made to crumble fairly easily. It might even be worth the defenders' efforts to try and counter-attack into those heavy goblin crossbows actually with something like those Sons of the Fallen, just to stop them from taking the lives of any more of these. I mean, especially seeing as the secondary front line in there is not going to be needed for a little while yet, considering the Khazad Reclaimers and 4th Legion Shield Guard are still keeping the attackers out of the main chamber of the throne and the treasure hoard. Blacker Rooks, Whiter Rooks. Again, all of these units looking a little bit depleted and battered in some way, maybe less so. Still bloodied, the King's Guard, but still much healthier than anything else they've got over here. They should be able to force their way through here eventually, although I think they see the benefits now in sending some more reinforcements down here to try and keep this front line going. I mean, the axe blows of those Khazad Reclaimers will certainly be most useful. Juggernauts and Stone Hewers as well. I mean, it also keeps them out of the crosshairs of these ever pesky heavy goblin crossbows. Probably going to be, yeah, they're going to be going after the guards of Khazad. I'm really surprised the defenders are not trying to make a beeline for attacking these heavy goblin crossbows at this point. It's a very peculiar thing indeed. Maybe they feel the need not to. I mean, maybe they don't feel the need to, I should say. Evan's army is running out of steam after all, and this is what I was slightly afraid of when Infinity sent all of his units across to the other side. Maybe proportionality doesn't really matter though. The quality that the dwarves have, it's looking more and more like it might well be enough to see them over the line in this one, despite a pretty ropey beginning. Still have some Drake Broodlings. Maven maybe completely giving up on this side, or at least sending over more crossbows to try and offer some support on this side of things. I mean, the crossbows would be really useful if you were to put them in here. They could then hit these units that are completely blocking the passage of the attackers. Warrior Halberds and Whiter Rooks. I mean, all of these Halberd units perhaps with their phalanx are now the best choice. the attackers. Goblin King's Guard. Elsewhere, there's not really a whole lot else, is there? And they may very well be running out of steam here, the attackers. The inverse of all the good work that they did earlier on, of course. We did mention how those losses would really start to accumulate, especially when you're up against a force which is as good on the defence as the dwarves are. They definitely did the right thing early on by being that aggressive, though. The opportunity was there, after all. Yeah, looking at all of the good quality units, Guards of Khazad in particular, I don't think the attackers are going to have enough left in the tank, unfortunately for them. Counter-attacking opportunity from Eclipse here. I mean, he's going to get hit by quite a lot of heavy goblin crossbows that are waiting for him. 3 units. Focus fire. Goblin King's Guard and Blackback Mountain Berserkers in melee as well, so this expeditionary force of the dwarves may be not the finest idea, but they're still going to give it a go. I mean, the pikes would be good against the bodyguard units. It's really just the inclusion of those crossbow bolts which is the fly in the ointment. Back up the field. Crossbows still waiting, loitering with intent. White are at Fearmongers. Still, you can see how useful these reclaimers have been on the front line. They've definitely proven their worth there. Back, I mean, at this point it really is just these 2 choke points. Sending forward some Orc Hunters, maybe as a countermeasure to the heavy goblin crossbows, but I mean, there are 3 units of them who are getting a really good crossfire off, so I mean, it's the lead that the dwarves have managed to build up over time will mitigate the effect of this final reach for glory. And you can see how quickly these Orc Hunters have been mown down by concentrated crossbow fire. They're going to try and retreat into the town centre now, undoubtedly. He seems certain only a military genius could win this fight. Which is interesting. I mean, it does go to show how useful pikes can be against bodyguard units that are not 100%. Heavy gobbo crossbows. Heavy goblins. And over here, this is really the... They can start making some yardage over here as we start into the final 10k frames. It could give the opening for some support from the crossbows from the other side, and that maybe is still a way in which the attackers can possibly go on to win this, although it is a stretch at this point, you'd have to say. Further back. Some good healthy blackbacks here, but only 1 unit of them. In terms of equivalency, you would back the Guards of Khazad in terms of a quality war between the 2. As the fight continues, I mean, Barrow-wights will take a while to mulch their way through, but I mean, long-term survivability isn't really going to win the day here. Drake Broodlings might force the issue. Punch a hole. It's here. I mean, in terms of like men and dwarves and orcs on the field, in terms of numbers, it's probably relatively even. But it's where these numbers are located now, and this is where the quality of the dwarves should shine. More and more of these heavy goblin crossbows are now out of ammunition and having to be used as a melee unit, which of course is not their calling. The unit of crossbows moving back, the drakes are going to try and force the issue on the other side like we already said, but even if they do manage to get the ball moving in the right direction again, I really doubt that we're going to see the business be done. Drake broodlings feasting upon the enemy, definitely causing a good amount of disruption there, if nothing else. Crossbows trying to help with their mass, I suppose, but I mean, this is it, the final roll of the dice really for the attackers. I think they will get through this defensive position without too many issues. Again, instigated by the drakes. It's whether or not they have the ability to carry that through, deal with all the dwarves that are still in here, and the Sons of the Fallen. We have the upgraded companies of 3rd Legion. Small matter of the guards of Khazad as well. And Thorin's halls in amongst them. Just in behind. Warrior halberds. And they might be able to force their way through here as well, just based on sheer numbers. Downhill charge, clipping the edge of that unit. Will do some damage at the very least. Interestingly enough, I think they are the only humans on the field today, these mercenaries. I don't think there were any... Well, I guess you don't really know what the Witchround Blackguard are, do you? Hammerguard are clearly orcs. The Blackguard, on the other hand, are shrouded. Could be much the same sort of lesser variants of the Witch King, I suppose. Stacking themselves up. Khazad reclaimers. The guards over on this flank. So this is it. I mean, it was a good push that from Infinity and Mabon's drakes and what remains of Froggy's Angmar. Definitely worthwhile. It's given them a puncher's chance here in the late game. Rushes, though, average quality is always a concern. In come the guards of Khazad as well, and they will be directly up against the healthy blackback berserkers that the attackers still had in the back pocket. Further afield, Drake broodlings pushing their way through, still being a menace, but to be fair, the Sons of the Fallen probably the worst place they could be at this stage in proceedings. Mercenary crossbows just going to try and get in their way, try and stifle any momentum they may hope to build. And that will be the end of the burnt crossbows by the looks of it. Still 4 juggernauts over here. Victory over here. Sons of the Fallen marching down here to ensure that there's going to be no surprises from elsewhere in the battlefield. And there's still these heavy goblin crossbows, I suppose, but it was at this moment the heavy goblin crossbows would have been needed to really support this front line. I mean, to be fair, even so far, these Drake broodlings, could they yet prove to be the difference makers? Could that counterattack from the clips down this ramp prove to be in error, giving those crossbows a chance to feast? And the losses of generals are probably going to be the thing which causes most issue here. Guards of Khazad, defeat is a distinct possibility. My. Still 62 of the guards of Khazad. I mean, the Blackback Berserkers will do decent damage to them in return, though, is the thing, so they can't count on the fact that they're still going to be in a healthy way
come the end of the battle, some of these sentries moving back across. I don't know where those 4 juggernauts went. Did they get blown over by the Drake Broodlings? Wrapping around the flank now as well are the Mountain Orc Berserkers. Need to get some of those units down on the ramp back up here. Sons of the Fallen are there. The problem with doing that, of course, is they need some unit to be ready to deal with the heavy goblin crossbows as they attack the other way. Third Legion starting to showcase their strength in melee. That armour upgrade potentially vital against a unit like the Black Uruks, less so against the Mountain Orcs, but it's the small matter of these Barrow Wights as well. I mean, they will be the last ones standing for the attackers, if nothing else. They will keep the attack going longer than anything else. There goes one of the attacking generals. Morale is a concern, of course, for the attackers at this stage. Any Moria units shaken up and any significant losses sustained to routing are maybe not the sort of thing the attackers can afford at this point. A nail-biting conclusion. I mean, the heavy goblin crossbows being interrupted by these very depleted dwarves. There's also one, technically Hammer Guard from Froggy. It's his general. No routing will happen for them, of course, because it's really only the Barrow Wights, aside from the general, that's still here. Snaga falling away pretty quickly. I don't know, you know. Loss of a dwarf general. More and more, that counter-attack from Eclipse down that ramp is looking like a terrible misstep. Intentional or no. 45 of them still remain. Blackback's taking damage at a higher rate, of course. Khazad Reclaimers once again showcasing their chops in melee. Damage they're capable of dealing with their axes. They're going to need to peel a unit off the front line though. Any volley that comes in here from the heavy goblin crossbows will be utterly devastating. Can they afford to peel anything off the front line is the problem. It would probably have to be the Khazad Reclaimers. Out of ammunition, in fact. Less devastating, but it's still a problem because you've still got 93 goblins attacking the rear of your line at this point. The Drakes, then, possibly the biggest problem child. I think it is. I mean, it's whether or not the dwarves have got enough survivability, enough mental fortitude, and there go the heavy goblin crossbows. Loss of the generals proving to be an issue. The Angmar general falls, but like I said, not the most important thing given what they still have. Warrior Halberdier is still fighting in melee. I think there's still generals to be seen. I think the dwarves have just about got enough. A real nail-biter here, though, in the final innings. Drake Broodlings feasting upon the Ered Luin general. I don't think Ered Luin have actually got anything left at this point. I think they have been entirely used. Yeah, the Drake Broodlings and the Snow Trolls have been the two most important units for the attackers by far, I think, in this battle. We showcase how useful units like that can be in terms of seizing momentum. In the end, the main infantry corps of the dwarves in this kind of environment always going to be a problem for lowly goblins and maybe not quite so lowly orcs to deal with. 20 blackbacks still there. I mean, it is going to come down to the Barrow Wights, isn't it? Drake Broodlings losing more each charge in the way that you would expect cavalry to. What's that? Goblin Kingsguard. Still 3 of them remain. Everything being thrown in. Throw it at the wall and see what sticks. Third Legion, only 5 of them remain. You can definitely understand why the Drake Broodlings are charging into this position, but I think the Khazad Reclaimers, other than the Sons of the Fallen, are the best equipped to do damage to them. during their hit-and-run escapades. You have to wonder how important that armour upgrade even on this 3rd Legion infantry was, because this is a battle that's ultimately going to come down to very small margins indeed. Barreling in there. One of the final 2 Drakes. Maybe the final one. Where's the other one gone? There is still 2. Now Guards of Khazad chopping their way forwards. A little over double the remaining blackbacks. I mean, not a bad performance by the Misty Mountains bodyguard unit by any means. They're up against one of the very best the game has to offer. That is the final defending general as well. He may yet fall away. Legion. Khazad Reclaimers starting to look a little bit thin on the ground as well. I mean, heavy axe units, even ones clad in the kind of armour that they are not the most defensively gifted units around. Ooh, the Goblin crossbows do still have ammunition, and they have returned. Why did they not use their ammunition earlier? How confusing. Some very confusing choices made late game here from both sides. And they're clearly going to go after the Guards of Khazad. Forward comes some... well, the Snaga are actually just routing. They need to push their way past those Drakes quickly. With each volley, their chances of victory ebb away, the Dwarves. And there goes the General. Tisk, tisk, tisk. Those volleys may have just turned the entire battle around. I don't know. Yeah, they're continuing to fire as well. Like these 3rd Legion can't peel themselves off the trash that's in front of them. Six blackbacks. Yeah, it's going to be an attacker victory, as much as I'm sure that's going to be devastating to some people, and it kind of is to me as well. I was hoping for a defender victory here to offset the fate of the Dwarves and their Dalian allies in Erebor last time around, but I mean, you could trace it back to the very same things, I suppose, but that counter-attack down that ramp, you have to question it. It's going to be that, isn't it? Still Guards of Khazad left alive, but 17 of them in the face of overwhelming force. If the Guards of Khazad can fight their way out of that situation, I'd be very impressed. I don't think it's going to be in their wheelhouse to do so. Goes to show how devastating crossbows can be close up as well. Still 13 Goblin Kingsguard as well, to be fair. There we have it. I was wondering how important how the Goblin crossbows would be able to get into an interesting position, or a good position to support their army effectively, and in the end, one of them is the difference between victory and defeat for both sides. Becoming tired, is it? Definitely see why. Third Legion. One of them still surrounded by crossbows. It was the only thing they could have done, really. It was the only unit they had available to try and stop the crossbows. They didn't get there in time, though. 2 or 3 more volleys left the end of those crossbows by the end of it. There we have it. Another attacker victory. Times 2 speed it will be. Actually, times 6 speed may as well. That is all that remains of the attackers. Barrow-wights, maybe not surprising to see them. Other than that, though, how much is that really going to be? A little over 50? can see the differences in numbers as well. And I mean, it was a battle that had many twists and turns. It's probably one of the better battles we've seen in quite a while, to be honest, in terms of what was actually going on. I mean, early on, of course, the attackers opened up feeling very good about themselves. They would have, based on how they were able to deal with the undermanned dwarven front lines that were laid on initially. In the mid-game, though, it was a little bit more topsy-turvy. We saw some examples of the attackers being able to continue that momentum or regain it in some cases. But in others, the dwarves were able to lay on really good, really efficient defences, and that's ultimately what brought them back into pole position going into the fight for the town centre, you'd have to say. But some choices made in that late game. Allowing the crossbows to be used as efficiently as they were. I mean, crossbows, they can deal damage so quickly that it's not like archers. You can withstand an awful lot against archers, especially as the dwarves, but crossbows are a different breed. And on this occasion, both for the starting fight for the town centre and how it finished, of course, they proved to be the difference makers, along with the Drake Broodlings and Snow Trolls for the sort of mass pushing and claiming of momentum that we saw throughout the battle. Those were the key units for the attackers, and just in general their numbers. As for the dwarves, I mean, what could you do differently? Better thought out initial defences, and also not counter-attacking down that ramp towards the end. Because I mean, the difference between victory and defeat, a full unit of pikes and a unit of Orc Hunters of Khazad probably would have been enough to turn this battle the other way. In fact, I'm sure of it. So, yeah, I mean, let's see what did the damage for the Khazad armies. There's probably going to be some big numbers here. Yeah, Orc Hunters of Khazad 417, 311, good amounts there. Several units breaking 200. Khazad Reclaimers were a very impressive unit for the defenders today. Sentries. You can kind of see where some of the units were victims of mass pushing as well, like 3rd Legion Infantry there, 59 on the Sentries of Khazad, 78 on Sons of the Fallen. But yeah, a mixed bag, but good kills, you'd have to say. I mean, when the margins are this close, the amount isn't really the problem. 367 on Sons of the Fallen. Sentries doing quite well for themselves again. Orc Hunters, again, that's the kind of, 200 plus is the return you'd want to see on archers against Orc armies of this size. So maybe 151 isn't quite enough, but 4th Legion Shield Guard 365. I mean, this is Lango's army. You can see very clearly where the units early on did not do well enough, and I mean, you have to say like 16 kills on 3rd Legion Infantry, 29, 21 on 4th Legion, nowhere near enough in this sort of situation, and it was the situation itself which was the reason for that. Tundra's Fox as well, I mean, 435 again, the Orc Hunters pulling their weight. Guards of Khazad tried their best in the late game, and it would have been enough as well if not for those volleys from those crossbows. 311 again, you can see very clearly where the mass pushing took place against certain units. And yeah, that is that. I mean, like I said, in terms of both sides having their moments in the sun, this was probably one of the better battles we've seen in quite a while, and this is how we sign off 2023. There will actually be another Dwarven themed map next up, which I've already recorded, but this one comes in before that because it's another set piece map, whereas that other one is something a little bit different, but do keep an eye out for that. And following on from that, we do have a battle on Thranduil's Halls upcoming as well, an updated version of that, which is a map that's been in the game for quite some time, but now, very much in need of an overhaul, I would suggest, so it's good to see. That will be the next big showpiece battle that Eclipse has sent me that we will get to see. But yeah, other than that, a few more Silmarillion ones as well, and going into the new year, obviously things are definitely ramping up with regards to the new patch, so hopefully this is the last battle that I'm going to be recording before I go home for Christmas, so yeah, we'll see what the state of play is when I return, but I hope you enjoyed this. A big thank you to Eclipse, of course, and all the players for being a part of this battle replay. I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for